than historic patterns could need another $16.6 billion through fiscal 2015. Can you shed some light on where it's at and broadly what the conclusions are?
Sure. Just to clarify a couple things, the Joint Estimating Team's most recent analysis is still a work in progress. The analysis continues, so I'm not going to get into numbers because numbers could change. As for the state of it being briefed to senior leaders, I can tell you that Undersecretary Carter has begun to be briefed on the jet. I think he's completed the first of what will be 3 briefings on it. It has not yet gone to Secretary Gates or Deputy Secretary Lynn, although I'm sure Secretary Carter will share it with them at the appropriate time. What I can tell you is obviously the jet is a very important tool in the budget process. It provides us a worst-case assessment of how the program will likely develop, and that is balanced against, on the other extreme, the program office's assessment of it, which is generally much more optimistic. And so what we need to do, what the Secretary tries to do, is to sort of figure out the sweet spot, if you will, between those. What's the appropriate balance between the jet's sort of sky is falling assessment and the program office perhaps rosier view of things? And just by way of example, in the fiscal year 10 budget, the Secretary clearly took a much more conservative approach to the F-35 program, investing heavily in hundreds of millions of additional dollars in the testing program, trying to buy down some of the risk that had been identified by the jet in their hundreds of millions of dollars in the last jet. So the new jet will clearly play a very important role as we go about figuring out what levels to fund the Joint Strike Fighter program at going into FY11 and throughout the 5-year defense plan.
Generally accurate, though, that this current edition is as pessimistic as last year's, although you don't want to talk about the numbers, but you mentioned sky is falling. I mean, that's one extreme, but is it an accurate depiction, though, that this is still a relatively pessimistic look at the program?
I think that's an accurate depiction, that it still does, that the jet clearly raises concerns about the course the program is on. And so, you know, this is something that, listen, this is the biggest, most expensive, and arguably most complicated program this department has ever pursued. We have a great deal riding on the success of this program. You saw Secretary Gates go down to Fort Worth and tell Lockheed Martin's president and CEO, chairman and CEO, that he is going to hold their feet to the fire on this. That there are timelines and that there are budgets that are going to have to be met. The most immediate being the initial operation, the IOC for the Marine Corps, or frankly, the testing squadron, and then the Marine Corps. And those, despite whatever the jet says, the Secretary expects to be met on time. So we will continue to watch this program like a hawk, and if necessary, make adjustments in our budgeting to buy down some of the risks that the jet identifies.
One follow-up. Lockheed today put out a statement to us that said, we acknowledge that moderate risks to our cost and schedule baseline exist. Do you agree with that the jet said moderate risks?
I'm not in a position to characterize it as moderate or serious or minimal. All I know is that we take the jet very seriously, but it is one input into the budgeting process. And as the Secretary moves forward with the FY11 budget, I am sure he will be weighing the view of the jet in how much we fund for the.
Doesn't paint the rosy picture, though, going forward. Is that an accurate?
Listen, if I think it's fair to say that if the jet had provided some especially good news, we would be trumpeting it. So obviously, but the jet I don't think ever provides good news. I think that's its job, to be pessimistic, and we appreciate that, and we will work with their team and the program office to try to figure out the best way ahead. But there is a lot of pressure on Lockheed. There is a lot of pressure on this building to make sure we get this right, and the Secretary is determined to do it. Okay? Yeah, Brian.
Speaking of pressures, the President's signature yesterday on the authorization bill obviously is a pretty clear victory for Secretary Gates. He got most of what he wanted. Still a few items, I guess, to be ironed out on the appropriation side, but can you give us any sense for whether he's committed himself to sticking around to do this again, not just to put together the budget proposal for FY11, but to see it through? Many people will agree, and I'm sure you would too, that a one-time victory in reshaping this department could be fleeting unless you follow it up with another one. So can you give us any insight into his commitments to stay, or when he will make such a commitment?
I'm surprised none of you called me when the President said yesterday that Secretary Gates and I look forward to working on this in the months and years to come. I don't know. I can't tell you, Brian, how long he intends to stay to work on that or any other problems this department faces. What I can tell you is that he is on the job and has a full plate and is looking down the field. He's not looking at his feet. He's looking down the field, and clearly the budget is something that is extraordinarily important to him, and he's very appreciative of the tough decisions that the Congress had to make, and the President is backing him on this on some of these very, very difficult decisions. Yeah, he wants to make sure that this is not a fleeting victory, that the changes that have been brought about in the fiscal year 10 budget are built upon in 11 and beyond. As we build the 11 budget, we'll build a 5-year defense plan. So that will help chart a course that can be, if not executed by him, by his successor. We didn't do that in 10, obviously, because there was a new administration taking over. But I think he is fully committed to trying to do as much as he can for as long as he can to make sure that the rebalancing of priorities in this department takes hold, and those roots are able to grow deep, and it ultimately flourishes in this building. Yes, sir.
Secretary Gates visited Japan last week and made it very clear that there is no alternative for Futenma replacement facility. But after the trip, Japanese Foreign Minister is proposing that Futenma's functions to be consolidated to Container Air Force Base. Could you explain why DoD thinks Container consolidation plan is not operationally workable?
Yeah, so I don't know how I can improve upon Secretary Gates on this issue. You were with us just last week in Tokyo. But the bottom line is we have certainly looked at Kadena as an alternative to Futenma. And we've carefully studied it, and it simply does not work. In addition to the fact it's probably politically untenable, but that's an issue for the Japanese government, operationally it is unworkable. And so you cannot consolidate the Air Force operations, the Marine Corps operations onto that facility and do all the things that we need to do to provide for the defense of Japan. So that is not a suitable replacement for Futenma. The only replacement that works is the one that's been agreed to by both of our governments, that's been built over the last 15 years, and that's Camp Schwartz to the north of the island, and that's where we are focusing our efforts, and we hope the Japanese government will as well. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. Finally, South Korean government has announced yesterday 300 South Korean troops will send to Afghanistan. Can you comment on that?
I haven't seen that, frankly. I'm not in a position to comment on it, but obviously we would welcome any and all contributions from our friends in South Korea. They've been there a long time, and the notion that they would, I'd have to take your word that they are plussing up their contribution. But if indeed that is the case, that would be most welcome news.
The United States have been asked on that issues about send to South Korea.
Have we been asking? Yes. Frankly, I I don't recall it being a major subject for the secretary when he was in Seoul this week. Obviously, you know, our departments talk to each other about things like that, and I think whether it be Japan's contribution or Korea's contribution, I think our only hope would be that it would be commensurate to the size of their wealth, of their economies. In Japan's case, they're the second largest economy in the world. In Korea's case, a top 15 economy in the world. There is a certain responsibility that comes with countries of that power and that wealth to contribute to this international effort in Afghanistan. And so we are welcoming of whether it be additional forces or money or PRTs or expertise, any and all would be appreciated. Yes, Ann Scott Tyson.
Back to the route clearance and EOD teams, I was just curious, why did these teams not go in when the major forces, you know, along with the major forces, so that they could be there with them? Is it that this was an unexpectedly severe IED threat, so a decision was made later to bolster them, or was it that they were?
I think it's a combination of things. I think certainly a certain number of route clearance teams did go in with the 21,500 forces that have been deployed under President Obama's administration. Some of those, I think, are indigenous to the units that actually deployed. I think we also did others in addition to that. Also, clearly, the IED threat has become worse over in the 6 months since the 6 or 7 months since the president made the decision to plus up in Afghanistan. And finally, it obviously is also predicated on the situation in Iraq. As the commander there believed he could take on greater risk, he volunteered to give up these kind of enablers to go to Afghanistan. And I think in some cases, and I'll have to double check, I think in some cases there were specialists with with urgently needed capabilities and expertise that went directly from one theater to the other. But this has been for a variety of factors, the levels have changed. Yep.
Thank you. Two quick questions. One, as far as Turkey and Iran relations, the Prime Minister of Turkey was in Iran. Military viewpoint, do you have any problem, the agreements they are signed, and it might be some kind of even military-to-military dealings?
How does India fit into that question? Or Pakistan?
Well,
I'm just teasing you. Come on, this is a...
I report to Turkey television.
Okay. Turkey and Iran relations, I don't have anything for you. I'm sorry.
And as far as India is concerned now, second, can you confirm?
I should have just waited.
Press reports that there is a billions of dollars in military-to-military package aid, including fighter planes and all that. It might be before Prime Minister of India's visit on November 24th in Washington. Is there something on the work?
Not that I have good knowledge of here at the podium, but if you have a specific question about what we're working on with India with regards to potential arms sales or otherwise, I'm happy to take the question.
I'm asking actually.
Come on by the office or send me an email and we'll get you precise answers. Okay, let's do it. Jim.
Jeff, it's pretty close to the deadline for that social media policy and for the thumb drive changes. Have you got anything on that?
No, I don't. Sorry. Go fish. Here we go. Go, Jeff.
I just wanted to clarify something. When you were talking about the SERP funds, did you say they could only be used if the Afghan government launches a reconciliation effort?
I think the question was, this authority deals with using SERP for a reconciliation effort. We don't launch reconciliation efforts. We're there to support the Afghan government. If they choose to launch a reconciliation effort, we have the wherewithal, thanks to this, to support it. But it's not something that we are going to pursue on our own. That's just...
So a brigade commander can approach local groups and say, do you really want to fight us? I mean, there's some money in it for you?
brigade commander can use SERP to try to put people to work, to do local development projects, things of that